streak fur against cold stone, eyes like embers barely shone. You didn't flinch when I drew near, just held your breath and disappeared. I wrapped you soft in borrowed thread. Your heartbeat whispered, don't let go. Now you run where the wind blows free. No more chains, no empty cage, just sky and me. Every scar you carry sings of how the lost can learn to breathe again. Weeks of quiet, slow repair, stitches fading, trust laid bare. You'd watch my hands with wary grace, then nudge my palm, a timid trace. One dawn you stood without a sound and turned your face towards solid ground. Now you run where the wind blows free. No more chains, no empty cage, just sky and me. Every scar you carry sings of how the lost can learn to breathe again.